But Rossport is such a beautiful spot. It's
I think
quiet.
it's a very special spot, really. We've got the islands out front, now part of the National Marine Park, Conservation Park. But it's just, there's a lot of trees, a lot of fresh air, a lot of fresh water. The town is restricted in size by its geography. There's cliffs on this end of the town, there's the railway tracks at the other end of the town, so it's never going to be too big and too touristy.
Yep.
And people are still amazed when they come into Rossport and there's no gas station. So, yeah, I don't think as a town it's ever going to be much bigger than it probably was. In fact, if you're interested, there is a photograph, that first picture on the wall as you're going up the stairs is a picture of Rossport Harbor in 1904. Now we see in the background a paddle wheel steamer, and I believe there was a fleet of them at one time plying the Great Lakes. I think they were based in Duluth. There's a large freighter in the foreground. There was a railway spur that went out onto the water so that fish could be loaded onto these large freighters, and probably lumber as well, because the railroad, for example, was built from the water, and that's why the track hugs the shoreline. So they would have used a lot of lumber for that, and would have fed them in. So right from a long way back, it was actually quite a busy little place.
Well, that's fascinating. Yeah, I would know Ned was telling me the history of the Canadian Pacific. She said was actually to make sure that Manitoba, or that Alberta and Saskatchewan stayed in, the Canadian
hands. That's British hands at the time. Yeah.
Well, that's understandable, but it's fascinating because that's part of the history that we really don't hear much in the state. The competitions that did exist with the states and Canada.
Right. Don't get me on Isle Royal.
Isle Royal. Yes, it's so far from Canada and so close to the States, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Well, we're at least as protected, so it's International Biosphere Preserve, so it's...
I suppose that's true. Yes.
So we'll all claim it that way.
Okay.
But yeah, I think we were laughing about how they made that little right-angle jut in the...
That's Canadian politicians for you.
Well, you know, who knows who knows what was.
They'd probably never heard of Isle Royal.
Well, exactly, and people at that time in Michigan didn't even want the UP, but they got it and held on to it, and now, of course, have extracted all kinds of.
Yeah, I would guess there were probably some strong mining interests at that time that had a good lobbying voice with the local legislators. So.
Well, actually, they got it as a second prize because they wanted to claim Toledo and couldn't get it, and so the states gave them the UP instead.
Okay, there we go.
Now, up here, your experience, coming from Winnipeg, I mean, that's quite a ways yet from here.
It's, about a 10-hour drive if you're not chancing any speeding tickets.
Yeah, and closer to the prairies, and so coming on to the lake, had you had Lake Superior experiences before?
Actually, the topography of the Canadian Shield comes right up to the edge of the Manitoba-Ontario border. So that area around Kenora is very similar. It's got those beautiful rugged rocks and trees and lakes. I'd spent a number of summer vacations with friends of my family that had cottages around Lake of the Woods. A much busier place, obviously, than Rossport, being so close to a large city. But the topography again, the land, the lakes, the water, I always enjoyed being there.
That's great. And do you get a chance to be out on Lake Superior much?
No. Hopefully more so in the future. Early days we did a little bit of kayaking. That was what I enjoyed. I'm not a real adventuresome kayaker. If there's lots of waves, I'd rather stay at home with a book. But when it's as smooth as glass out there and you can just glide through the water.
I can't imagine a better sea kayaking area than this.
No, we've actually had people from the West Coast, sea kayakers from who've done all around Vancouver Island, come here and say how much they've enjoyed it. For a number of reasons. One is that there you don't find the debris on the shoreline that is washed out by the ocean tides, and then you can just dip your cup in the water and drink it.
Isn't that nice? That is really something. I hopefully will protect it. I mean, one of our concerns as we're going around the lake is fresh water.
Right.
and people are not concerned enough from our perspective about what the future of the lake is and what the future of freshwater. We just assume it's big and it'll be okay.
Right, right. Well, there's a couple of interesting things that, you know, that can affect that. I was watching, I believe it was actually a National Geographic video about the retreat of Niagara Falls, and how in about 12,000 years it'll get to the point where all the Great Lakes are just going to drain dry if we don't protect that.
Yeah.
Too. But
if we haven't already drained them so that we can have golf courses in Arizona.
That's another issue.
But I'm concerned about the mining, about some of the practices. The lake is good right now, and we should, there are bays that we can't dip that cup in.
I'm sure.
But overall, the lake quality is such that we should say this is the standard. We should never allow it to get below this.
Well, actually, our town draws water from the lake.
Oh, great.
We have a town water system now. A few years back, there was an incident in southern Ontario. They call it Walkerton because that's where it took place. A couple of people falsified the water records. It was an area that had a lot of pig farming, chemical drainage into the water system, and 7 people died from E. coli and thousands were made sick. And so it became, a very big issue throughout the province, and money was allocated to put new water treatment centers in all of the rural communities that already had a water treatment center. This again is government. They didn't really look at what the activity was in each area. There are no pig farms around here. There's no golf courses. There's nothing draining chemicals into this particular community. As far as the paper mills are concerned, there's been a watch on those for several years now already, although it may have been half blinkered. But so we ended up with a $3.8 million water treatment center here in Rossport. So the fellow who was one of the bidders on the contract had come, and he had tested the water before it went in. He said, "Oh, it's some of the cleanest water he's ever tasted or ever tested." And we still got this expensive water treatment center. So
I guess you're prepared for the future to a certain extent.
Yes, to a certain extent. I mean, I don't know if technology will ever kind of keep up with demand. We're still drawing water out of the lake, so if the lake level were to go down significantly, that would have to...
Now, you must have noticed, though, that the lake level definitely has gone down, and this year is as low as I've ever seen it.
Yeah, there are certain fluctuations. We didn't have a lot of rain.
Right.
Which is one of the factors. There's a huge watershed further north, the Gravel River Canyon and some of the other canyons that drain into the lake. But yeah, it affects mostly people who've got docks out at the front. They notice, oh yeah, gotta lengthen that rope for the boat.
Yeah. What concerns do you have for the future of Rossport and the lake here?
Yeah, well, I guess I would like to see the area maintain a good level of tourism. That is affected by other things which are far beyond the scope of just the water, but I would like that to be sustainable without causing too much of a negative impact. I think that the type of tourism that we see here is good for the lake. I think we see people who are coming here to kayak, they tend to be interested in a wilderness experience. They don't leave their garbage behind in campsites.
Right.
Years back there may have been other types of tourists that were less concerned with the footprint that they left behind. So I think the kind of people that are coming now are what we want to see more of.